Here we are. You ready for this?
I'm ready. In the basement, at long last.
Episode 1. I thought we could start by introducing each other, just so it'd be a little test about what we know each other, just to introduce ourselves to anybody listening out there.
I love it.
I could start with you, Buddy. Buddy's been a friend for about 7 years now. We met when in church. And when we got out of the military and moved here, we were introduced, and I stared at you from afar because you were the professional full-time farmer, and I was very much an aspirational farmer at that time. But we were introduced, and now we're great friends and doing a podcast together. But you own and operate Big Spring Farm, which is a working, regenerative agricultural holding, and you do ducks and chickens, you do pastured hogs, forest raised hogs, you do cattle on pasture, you do a number of livestock, and take them to butcher and use them for your own consumption. I buy a lot of your product for our cafe in town. And you also, the more prominent piece of your business is the wedding venue, which is right out the door. The wedding venue, folks, is unbelievably gorgeous. One of the prettiest parts of Virginia, I'm convinced. But there's a 3.3 million gallon a day freshwater spring that the venue overlooks. The venue's an old barn that's been restored. It's gorgeous. But you run the wedding venue with your wife, and you live not too far away, and you do the farm. But it's a very successful farm and venue here in Virginia.
What a kind intro. That's all spot on. You skipped a lot of the bad stuff, which is great. No, just kidding. All right, I'm happy to introduce Daniel, my good friend of nearly 7 years. Mm-hmm. And so Daniel Daniel was in the military for a while. I met you when you were a firefighter in the Army Reserves. Mm-hmm. And you were farming. But now Daniel is one of the guys in our little rural community that gets recognized everywhere, and has started and grown this awesome backyard business. He started a bakery in his backyard. Gosh, I don't know. Is it 2.5 years ago or longer?
Full-time, 2.5.
Full-time, 2.5 years ago. But started baking well before then. But started a bakery in his backyard that today comprises a barn bakery, a barn that you built as a bakery, mm-hmm. with an Airbnb above. Mm-hmm. Twice a month, Daniel, his wife Fawn, their team host what they call Bread Day, which is essentially it's like a farmer's market in your backyard. There's other vendors, and then also in the bread barn, you have a coffee shop where people get pastries and pick up their bread orders, mm-hmm. get coffees. There's live music. There's, it's super fun. There's hundreds of people there at mm-hmm. Bread Day. And then you also, more recently, started a cafe in our little town of Lexington that has been really successful. Daniel employs a bunch of people in our community now, and we've grown our businesses shoulder to shoulder, totally different businesses, but we've had a lot of fun in our friendship, brainstorming and
encouraging each other.
Yeah, challenging each other, mm-hmm. to questioning a decision once mm-hmm. in a while. It's been a real gift, I would say. And that's my 30,000 feet. That's what Daniel's up to now. And
I think that's a good lead into why we're here doing the podcast. Is yes. that relational piece. And what I'm really excited about for the podcast is I think you and I are pretty spoiled because of our entrepreneurial network here with each other. And then we have so many friends here in the local area and surrounding area that are striking out on their own, taking mm-hmm. this idea and making it their passion, their dream work, really. And we wanted to introduce that to the audience. And this podcast is not we have figured it out. will tell you how to do it.
Amen to that.
This is we want to introduce you to a lot of our entrepreneurial friends who are doing things in an awesome way and are financially successful, have a balanced family life, and are admirable in how they're doing business. And so that was one piece of the podcast. We feel rich and spoiled relationally, and we want other people to be exposed to these inspiring stories.
Yeah. Yeah, I think brick and mortar type businesses, place-based businesses, aren't as sexy nowadays as other businesses might seem,
Or celebrated.
yeah, or celebrated. And we have a lot of friends, like you said, in that space. So there's excitement for telling those stories, continuing to learn from one another, continuing to learn from the guests we can have on, and stand for, I think, put a stake in the ground for the brick and mortar business to tell that story.
Yes, and we love entrepreneurship, if that's a word.
Entrepreneurship.
Entrepreneurship. We love hearing other people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
We love talking about it. We could talk all day about new pursuits and new ideas, and we really, I think, inspire each other in that way. And so this is a selfish podcast in that sense, where we can do that in this forum and bring on other people.
Yeah, and invite listeners to follow along.
Yeah, and to learn and all be educated and be in a better place business-wise because of it, which is really exciting. But that's why we're doing it.
Love it. Love it. That's why we're here. Here in the basement.
Here in the basement. Shall we do this?
Yeah, let's go. So for this episode, we talked about we're going to kind of go back and get into more of your story.
Okay. I'm ready.
Yeah, which I think will be fun because we've known each other for a while, but even just in prepping for this episode, you start mentioning stuff that I'm like, wait, what? I've never heard this story or any of this part of the story. So I think it'd be really fun to go back. You had a whole life before doing the bakery in the military, and there's so much there. I mean, you transitioned from military into, a job and then starting your own business. And let's go back. Where do you want to start with, like military? Why that? Tell us more about how you got into military.
I have this awful nose itch.
And I say military, the Army.
The Army. Yes,
the Rangers.
The military is a significant part of our story, and it really has contributed largely to where we're at now. But I was raised in a military household. My dad was 35 years in the Navy, so I grew up moving around all the time, being exposed to the military, and that is what I wanted to do. Being a entrepreneur in business is a recent excitement. Before that, I was 100% military focused. All of my growing up, just wanted to be a Navy SEAL, and that's where I applied all my focus and attention. And the legacy of military service is such in our family that I really didn't know there was anything else. It was, your great-grandfather served, your grandfather served, your father served.
Your great-grandfather served in the military?
Yes.
That's crazy.
On both sides.
I didn't know that. And also, fun fact, growing up, we met, I guess, like 5-6 years ago.
In our 30s, yeah.
In our 30s?
Yeah.
But we grew up like 2 miles from each other.
Right.
2 miles apart in Northern Virginia outside of D.C. That is such a funny part to the story for me because I'm like, somehow we must have crossed paths in the beehive that is
D.C.
greater D.C. area. But anyway, yeah. I didn't know your great-grandfather's in the military. Was he in the Army or the Navy?
He was in the Army. One in the Army, one in the Navy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, both. Yeah.
So there was this legacy, and so I wanted to serve, and then there was never an unspoken expectation, but there was always a unflagging support of service members. So it was compelling to do that. Mm-hmm. So I want to be Navy SEAL. I want to do something special in the military, so to speak. That was where my dreams lie. But I was homeschooled growing up from the 3rd grade on, which was a significant part of my upbringing. But I didn't get into the Naval Academy. So I went to Wheaton College, a small Christian liberal arts school outside of Chicago. And I went there on Army ROTC scholarship. So the Army paid for my school. In exchange, I would serve for at least 4 years on active duty as an Army officer. So I got an Army scholarship to school. While at Wheaton, I met my wife, Vaughn, who I'll reference throughout. And we were married before I graduated Wheaton. And then Tirza, our eldest, who is 12, was born before we left Wheaton and left for Army training.
Oh,
so
I didn't know that. Okay.
Tirza's been with us the whole time.
That is wild. Okay.
But I went to Wheaton. I hadn't ever played football before and walked onto the football team in large part to impress my then acquaintance, my
You
wife.
had never
Vaughn.
played football before? I did not know
Never
that part of the
played
story.
football.
That's crazy. And you walked on. I assumed that you
I
went
walked
like
on.
kind of to play football.
I did not go to play football,
That's hilarious.
but all the
Daniel.
offensive linemen were so enthralled by Fawn. Fawn was an All-American swimmer, had a
Okay.
bit of a celebrity status. I was this nerd of a freshman homeschool kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, if she's getting attention from all the football players, I need to play football
Get
too.
on the team.
So it took a long time. I had to film for the football team and then had to try out for the team. And then,
You went from film guy to oh my
I filmed.
gosh.
yeah, and it was me and my buddy
It's like
Josiah. It was a Rudy-esque moment. And just like Rudy, I never played. Yeah. But I walked on, so I played my junior and senior seasons for Coach Swider, who's a legendary Wheaton coach, whose son married
Shout out
my
Coach
sister. Yeah, a wonderful man. So anyway, played football, did the Army ROTC thing, got married, had a child, and then it was time to start the military service. And at that time, it was graduating in 2010. The war in Afghanistan and Iraq was still strong. We knew what we were walking into, and I had branched infantry. I was an infantry officer, which is it's the tip of the spear for the Army. That's the boots on the ground, the trigger pullers. The action arm of the Army is the infantry. So that's what I was intrigued by and wanted to do. Even though, as a young married guy, I knew it would come at some expense. I just didn't know what at the time. But I branched infantry, and we went to Fort Benning for training. So while at Fort Benning, I went to Ranger School and did the infantry officer basic course. The most basic qualifications for an infantry officer, knocked those out at Fort Benning before moving to Fort Lewis, Washington, just outside of Olympia, Tacoma, Washington area, which was my first unit in the Army. So we moved to Georgia as a family and then moved to Washington State as a family, all within 1 year of leaving college.
Mm-hmm. And you're an officer because you went through college through the ROTC program. So you go into these trainings and you're already at officer status or officer rank is the
right.
Is that the
So
right term?
You can enlist in the Army or you can go in as an officer, and I chose to go in as an officer. And so there's different trainings for each, but there's the enlisted side of the house and the officer side of the house. So I went into the Army as a second lieutenant as an officer.
And then how do you get into Ranger school? Is that just something you can sign up for and say, hey, I want to be a Ranger? And if you meet base qualifications, they'll let you in? Or
as an infantry officer, there's a pipeline that you follow training wise, and every infantry officer has to attempt Ranger school. Ranger school has a 50% attrition rate, so not everybody gets the coveted Ranger tab. But as an infantry officer, there was an expectation that I go. And if you don't get your tab as an infantry officer, it doesn't mean your career as an infantryman is over, but it's an immediate way that a young officer can gain respect from the soldiers he would be leading. So it's an important
not a good
step
look
along the way.
if you don't make it through Ranger
It's
school.
not a
as an
good look.
officer.
And I want to be careful. I have several wonderful friends who are more accomplished than I am Army-wise that went to Ranger School and didn't get their tab. They just had a harder uphill fight than those who walked away with their Ranger tab. But just one thing about Ranger School, and these things have impacted us long term, but Tirza was just a few weeks old when we moved to Georgia. She was 3 weeks old when we moved to Georgia, and she was 4 months old when I went to Ranger School. In Ranger School, you say goodbye to your spouse, and it could be a year, before you're done Ranger School. If you go straight through it, 60 days, 60 rigorous days. And that uncertainty and the time away characterized our military service. And so that Ranger School time for Fawn, and at the time, it was the most, and I think to this day, it was the most trying time of our marriage.
More than like getting deployed or anything like that, the Ranger School was.
Those were certainly comparable, but the Ranger School was that first realization of what we were committing to and sacrificing for as a family.
And how old are you when you go to Ranger School?
22.
22, yeah.
And Fawn was a few years older, but just there's a lot of naivety just as a young person.
Yeah, that's why I was making sure I knew your age. I knew you were right out of college, but yeah.
A lot of naivety and a lot of this blind sense of patriotism and service and these ideals, which are good and noble. And you're doing it as a family unit now. That added a different complexity, a different aspect that I wasn't fully prepared for. So Ranger School was that wake up moment of, this is a family endeavor, and it is something that we're going to have to purposely sacrifice for to do this well. And that was overwhelming at the time.
So
and
how
I'll
long
build on that later, but I did go straight through by the
60
grace
days
of the Lord.
you made
60 days.
I mean, you walked on the football team. You're going to make it.
There were just several. The Lord's hand was in there.
That's crazy.
Lost a bunch of weight and came out looking emaciated.
Really?
And it was a rigorous.
What kind of weight loss are we talking? Like from what?
I think I lost 30 pounds. I played football at 240 pounds. I went to Ranger School at 200 pounds, and I walked out of Ranger School at 175.
Whoa! So you went from over, I guess, a year or so, went from 240 to 175.
Yes,
that's a major change.
Yeah. I was way more of a man.
I will say,
football
when I started farming, so I graduated college, not Ranger School. I go into farming.
Yeah.
I went from
similar.
Very similar. But the weight loss, I went from like 210-ish to out of college to after a summer of interning at a farm and then starting my own farm and not being married yet, so just solo
grinding.
dolo. Yeah. I think I got down to like 165 or something. I was like high school weight basically. But yeah, that's a transformation.
It was.
I miss those days.
Yeah, we were just talking about that.
Yeah.
We could use some of that.
That's right.
Drastic weight
Some
loss.
cardio maybe.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you made it through Ranger School.
Made it through Ranger School, which seems like Ranger School. It's a rigorous school. The Army calls it its premier leadership school. It's a school of learning how to be a leader under less than optimal circumstances. And
is it like, can you give me a couple? Is it like Navy SEAL? This clips I've seen of them on the beach and doing the boat sit-ups and the surf, and is it like that, or is it more classroom? What's the rigor? Is it physical and mental? Is it like the Navy SEAL stuff that that I'm familiar with?
I gotta be very careful about my
maybe I shouldn't have brought them up.
There's a love-hate relationship there.
Yeah,
they're different schoolhouses. I think Ranger School is unique, and I went through Ranger School with several Navy SEALs who were just like, "This sucks, man."
Yeah,
because it's a grind. It's such a grind. It's a mental and physical grind, which is comparable to Navy SEAL training, but Hell Week, their culminating stressor is 5 or 6 days long. Ranger School is at minimum it's 60 days long. So, your pack is 120 pounds. You might be carrying more weight depending on what your assignment is in the squad. You're out in the elements for that whole time.
You're out in the elements for 60 days. You don't go inside.
You're running simulated operations. So you're fighting against a fake enemy, and it's under the construct of they're watching and evaluating the leaders and watching how you handle this thing called leadership. And if you get goes, that means, you've hit the minimum criteria of leader for that particular period. But it's the grind, it's the rigor, it's the deterioration of your body over a long time. And so that has a different sort of mental difficulty to it.
Yeah.
That's the hard part of Ranger School. And you're being evaluated the whole time. So, you buddy, you're my Ranger buddy, and I'm supposed to lead you, and you haven't slept or eaten in the past day. That's makes leading you very hard.
Especially if it's me.
You're just gonna want to stay in your sleeping bag. It's raining outside.
Yeah.
It's very hard. So not only do you have the mental and emotional physical grind, but now you're being evaluated on how you lead other people that are enduring that grind. And
some people have been there for more than 60 days.
Some people are just over it. But they say,
brutal.
your Ranger tab, other people earn it for you. It's such a group endeavor. And if your boys aren't and ladies aren't pulling for you, you won't get your tab. So
gotcha.
There's Survivor-esque, like vote a guy off the island type of exercises there, where if you don't have rapport with your peers, they'll literally vote you off and you'll get kicked out of Ranger School.
Dang.
So there's all these different.
It's political too.
It's political
It's
too.
pure democracy. That's crazy.
But it was people have a lot of different feelings about it. It was a great task to have to encounter and complete.
Yeah.
And set a good standard for, I shouldn't say set a good standard. It was a good metric to know where you're at personally going into a rigorous environment like combat and leading people in similar type of environmental and physical stressors situations, which I think we'll talk about. But yeah, it was formative, and I'm very thankful I went straight through.
Okay, so you're out of Ranger School and you're in active duty. So what's that look like?
Yeah, so now the true test came, and we moved as a family to Washington State, and I reached my first unit. And soon after arriving, within several weeks, we find out we're on the patch chart, which means you're on the big Excel spreadsheet for deployment. And so we were going to deploy in just a few months after we got there. Was that
expected? That seems pretty quick. Or is it just you're a Ranger, so it could happen?
It was expected. I think because I was incoming to the unit, I probably wasn't privy to everything that had been shared. So the unit had already been training and prepping for deployment. But we come and we find out, Fawn and I find out that we're deploying.
And I just thought, time of the world, it's when the U.S. is in a war with Iraq, Afghanistan. Right?
We're in both places. So we find out we're going to Afghanistan. And so I was put in charge of a platoon. I was a platoon leader at the time, and said goodbye to Fawn and deployed. And it was going to be a 9.5, 10-month deployment.
Whoa.
To the Maiwand District, Kandahar Province, which was significant because it's just across the river from where we were in Maiwand was the birthplace of the Taliban and a stronghold for them, which turned to be pretty sporty for the 10 months.
So 10 months, that seems like is that typically how long deployments are? That seems like a long time.
At that time, that was average. They had been as long as 18 months.
Whoa.
Some were shorter, but the 9-10 month range was.
And you're 22, 23 in charge of a platoon. How big is a platoon?
roughly 40
Okay.
infantrymen.
Dang. Okay.
Yeah. Which
right.
is it just the way the Army is structured things. I'm the youngest, the greenest, maybe not the youngest, but certainly the most greenest in the Army. And I am in charge of this platoon of 40. So there's this fine balance of humility and understanding you don't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then the confidence to make decisions for the good of the platoon.
It's a lot like
or to
running a
follow
business
orders.
at times.
There's so
I don't
many
really
parallels.
know,
Right.
but
we're striking out.
I'm going to make the decision. We're going to go.
Right. It is.
Okay, yeah. So you deploy. You're in Afghanistan.
Correct.
Can you give us? I know you have a lot of stories from that time. I've heard a few of them. Is there something that you could share that sort of defines that time, or that was like a big you can look at now as like that was a inflection point, or something that you look back at as, when I think about my time over there, this was this was one of the things. There's
several of those for sure. I think that whole period of deployment, that 10-month was the most dramatic and impactful 10 months of my whole life, for sure. And there's so many layers to it. But I think about that time more days than not, even now. And so much of what I learned and how I grew and what Fawn and I endured together plays in a significant fashion to who we are and how we operate now. But it was...
Sorry, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Can you give me one example of that? Like how you guys, I think that's really interesting, because I was thinking, you're deployed for 10 months, and it really has a lot to do with how you and Fawn interact now, and your life now is, your business is in your backyard, and you're home 99 with family 99% of the time, basically. And I assume when you're there in Afghanistan a decade ago or more, you got phone calls with Fawn, basically, or was there FaceTime?
I don't remember FaceTime. Our connectivity was very minimal. But I think the way it defined our relationship and how it impacts us now is we really don't like to be apart from each other. And we thought we really want to do something. This is after we, put a bow on the military, was we really want to do something together, because we really don't like saying goodbye. And working together, vice separately, was really appealing to us. So on that deployment, we were just talking about this the other day. We spoke 3 or 4 times over that time.
Over 10 months.
There's very little time. We had 1 pay-per-minute phone that the platoon rotated through. So didn't really have many minutes available when it got to me. So all it was, a quick check-in. How you doing? I'm alive. We're good. All right.
And you've got a 1-year-old at home, 1.5-year-old. Wow.
And so you can imagine the stressors that creates. And then amidst the unit took 20% casualties over the duration of that 10 months. So the phone calls Fawn is getting are from the other wives, whose husband might have died or been injured. And so phone calls were a make or break moment for Fawn. Either confirmation that I was still doing well, or, fearing the worst, that something bad had happened. Wow. So as the deployment drew on, the casualties increased and the stressors increased as well. So that was on the family side. On the personal side, the deployment was everything I had ever dreamed of doing for my country. We were in active combat more days than not, and in really austere conditions, and having the privilege of leading soldiers not even old enough to drink back home. And they're the forefront of the on the forefront of what their nation is asking them to do. They are where the rubber met the road in that particular area in Afghanistan. So that particular district for the duration of our deployment was the most kinetic, or had the most significant acts during that time. So the most small arms contact, the most IEDs, these SIG acts as we called them. This area had the most. So I mean, it was just sporty the whole time. So it was this juxtaposition between
sporty. That makes
sporty.
it. That's much more lighthearted than the reality. Wow. Oh.
So it was a juxtaposition between what I always dreamed of doing and getting to do it and feeling privileged to do so, and then the stress and anxiety of being away from my loved ones, certainly. So both those two things certainly shaped who I am now, for sure. One story that had great impact, and even to this day, occurred shortly after we got to Afghanistan, but my platoon was tasked with being the decisive operation of a battalion-sized air assault, which means everybody's taking helicopters to the X. And we had to find this bad dude and clear the village of any Taliban. Well, fast forward 3 days, and the battalion had left. We didn't find the individual. We had a lot of contact, but we were told to stay and maintain a presence in the village.
Platoon was told to
just
stay.
My
everybody
platoon.
else packed up.
Everybody else left. And the IED threat was significant, and there was a big dust storm that kicked up and lasted several days. So we had taken over a compound in the village, and we're using this as our strong point where we were staying, and we couldn't get any resupply. So we were on and off in contact at this location, responsible for maintaining a security perimeter in this village. We're miles from support.
And why did they leave just your platoon? What was the thought there?
I'm trying to think of how to succinctly say it, but the idea was that by maintaining a presence at any particular locality in Afghanistan, you would reduce the impact of the Taliban.
They wouldn't want to come back.
Right.
Basically.
They wouldn't want to come back. So we were on and off in contact. The environmental conditions prevent any aerial resupply, so no helicopters could come resupply. The IED threat was so great that no vehicles could come resupply. So we had to wait for the weather to clear for the helicopters to bring in resupply. So one day led to 2 day led to 3, and we had been out of food for 3 days. And I was having to ration our water. So I'd pour half a cup. Buddy Powers, here you go. And I'd hand it out. And I slept with the water under my cot, rifle in hand, because everybody was getting really desperate.
Yeah, how much water are you getting? Is everybody getting per day by day?
I remember the last day. So it was 3 days with 3 days no food, 3 days rationed water, and that last day everybody probably got half a water bottle's worth. And the little Dasani water bottles is what we had for what we had gone on mission with. And so we're talking with command, and they're saying we can't get anything in. So we realized the situation is dire. And it was, looking back, it's laughable. You think this big, bad army, the United States Army, and we can't
all these resources at their disposal.
And water.
Yeah.
And it's easy in those situations to feel, especially for a young guy out there, to feel, I'm forgotten about. How is this working?
Yeah, and I assume it's always hot there, but
it was July.
I was going to say it's summer. Oh, gosh.
Hot as very hot.
Like the surface of the sun.
It was very hot.
Oh.
So the situation was dire. And so we were holding out, and this is where the Ranger School ideals of how do you lead people in duress, or in deprivation type situations certainly played a part, but it was a real test of leadership, and I didn't succeed in every facet for sure. And there's, to some extent, we were waiting for food and water to arrive. And the battalion commander came over the radio, and my call signs Braves 3-6. Brave 3-6, we're going to have resupply tonight. The weather's clearing, and so everybody gets really excited. And they were going to drop the resupply from helicopter into the compound. And the helicopters couldn't stay too long. Right on the doorstep. Little DoorDash, if you will.
DoorDash resupply.
But the helicopters couldn't stay long enough just because of small arms fire. They were gonna literally hover, kick the things out the door, and go. So everybody's very excited. We've made it, and they were going to do it under the cover of darkness. The helicopters, we hear them coming. The anticipation is great. Like we literally are going to survive. This is about 3 weeks into a 10-month deployment.
Oh, this is at the very beginning.
The very beginning. So it really set the tone.
Afghanistan.
Intro to war. So we hear the helicopters. They come and go, and everybody's watching in their night vision devices to see big, piles of food and water dumping into the compound, and they never came. Battalion commander came over the net and said, "Okay, you got them." And we have a short communication where I say, "Sir, there's nothing here." Heard the helicopters, heard them leave, nothing hit the ground. And he said, "Let me go make contact with the pilots."
Could you even see the helicopters? Like, did they definitely make it to the little village you were in?
They definitely flew right over us. And there was different methods of marking for us to indicate where our location was. And there were, I think, some environmental conditions prevented, them from seeing, or they were given the wrong coordinates. But the battalion commander came back over the net and gave us, he said, "Okay, they gave me the coordinates. They definitely dropped it. Prepare to copy. Tango Golf 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm plotting this on the map. And then I realize, okay, they definitely dropped it, and it's definitely 3 miles away.
Oh gosh!
And that was a very difficult moment, because then we need to go get the supplies. That's our survival. Is 3 miles away, which 3 miles in those conditions in this part of Afghanistan might as well have been 100 miles, just because of all that could happen in that time. And with limited support assets because of the weather. And so we really were on our own, and we had to go get the supplies.
Did the sandstorm kick back up or something?
There was a lull in the storm at that time, which is why the helicopters
that's why they couldn't
come.
Be like, all right, we'll try again.
Right. I think it was a big effort to get us what they got us.
Yeah.
And that was it. And we were on our last leg, so we needed that resupply. And so I remember addressing the platoon and giving them the situation. We got to go get it. And everybody's at a differing level of fitness and ability at that point to actually go get the supply. So I asked for volunteers, and it was a very movie-esque moment of, given the condition, trying to give a little rah-rah, "Hey, I need volunteers. Can't ask you to go."
They come with you to go get
Come with me. That's right. Who's with me? And 6 guys raised their hands, and I have the utmost respect for them to this day for doing so, because everybody was feeling less than optimal, and that's an understatement.
Yeah, 3 days no food,
these
3
are
days
young,
rationed water.
17, 18, 19-year-olds that said, "Sir, we'll go."
And spirits crushed of, we're going to get a resupply, and then it just flies right over you. Oh,
right.
man.
And I'm feeling the same effect, but have the luxury of not, I can't show it. Which is, an interesting dynamic. But so we set out. This was, I can't remember the exact times, but it was after dark that they should have come. They didn't come. By the time we got ourselves out the door to go get it, it was 7 of us, including myself. It was probably close to midnight, between 11 and midnight, I'd say. And so there's value in the darkness, and so we need to get this done and back by the time the sun comes up, because just the threat of being identified and being in contact goes up with the daylight, obviously. Mm-hmm. So we set out, and I have the grid coordinates where the stuff was dropped, and everybody's charging along, plodding along. And remember, the IED threat was significant. That's why no vehicles could come. So you're tiptoeing around, hoping for the best. And
are you sweeping as
we
you're
had
going?
a GPR mine detector, basically a ground penetrating radar that it looked like a metal detector, and everybody followed that guy. And if he heard any pings, you'd choose a different route. We gave up on that quickly just because of the slowness which it created with getting to the stuff. So we just thought, hey, the threat of not getting food and water is greater than the ID threat at this time for us. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what we did. But we kept walking, and then the sandstorm picked up to a point where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and reading a map was difficult. You had to remember taking my outer blouse off, laying down on the ground, putting it over me and my RTO to block out the sand so we could use a light and physically see the map to plot where we were and where we were going.
And how are you? Do you have like GPS or something, or how is that?
We didn't have. It was a map and protractor.
Oh my!
A map
gosh.
and a protractor. So
you basically just went back 100 years plus.
This is all skills that any infantryman should know. So we had the tools. The conditions were just awful. But the sandstorm was such that I had 550 cord, paracord, and I tied each man to each other. So all 7 of us were linked like we were climbing Mount Everest, just so we wouldn't lose each other in the storm. And we just kept walking. And I can honestly say I only got lost one time while in the Army, and that was one of the times. And I got turned around, and I don't know how, but I made some mistake and realized that I didn't know where we were in relation to what I was seeing on the map. Just, you can imagine the howling wind, the sand, just the conditions were awful. And I didn't, and I didn't know where we were.
That's crazy. And there's IEDs. And there's potentially bad guys anywhere.
Right. So is it funny how those external threats kind of are minimized in your mind when you're in survival mode? Like, all we were thinking about was 1 foot in front of the other, 1 foot in front of the other, all tied together. I mean, it would have made a comedy to see that. So hours pass. I don't have any idea what time it was. I know I didn't know where we were, and I was praying as I've never prayed before.
So you've been lost for hours at that point,
we've been moving for hours. I don't remember how long we were lost for.
Gotcha.
It felt like an eternity of not knowing, but guessing on where we should walk in the sandstorm to get to where we should have been going. Like, there's no reference point now. The sandstorm, very difficult. And then I trip and fall into the sand. And what I had tripped over were the body bags filled with ice cold water and MREs. By some miracle, had stumbled on the food cache that the helicopters had dropped.
God's provision in that is crazy.
Yeah. It's too improbable to have it be pure chance. It was just the Lord's provision, which is pretty incredible to consider. So that was the climax of that moment. And then, there's a huge amount of food and water. And now the 7 of us have to get hundreds of pounds of it back to...
Were you guys just like
the outpost.
I was just thinking when you all realized that you actually, by the grace of God, stumbled on top of all the provisions you were lost looking for. Was it just like, did you laugh? Was it just like joy, or what was the feeling, if you remember?
Complete joy. And I remember we all just, you imagine in the midst of the sandstorm, we all crack a cold one and just kind of pouring cold water over us, just being very liberal with the use and just being so excited. And the realization of having to move it back hadn't really hit us. It was just the excitement of, this is crazy. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And there's this.
That is so awesome. That part is.
Yeah. Pretty, also would have made an awesome picture. And just to be motivated by the spirits of these 6 other guys was pretty incredible. And that shared suffering, which creates an unbreakable bond. It was just so cool to be in that moment when that was formed. And so we had to move the supplies back, which was to date the hardest thing that I've ever done. And so the sandstorm hasn't cooled down, and we're tied together, and we're harnessed to these body bags. Body bags are synthetic material bags that you put a dead soldier into to get him off the battlefield type of thing. So an odd, very, what's the right word? Ironic situation.
That's where your saving provisions came in the form of body bags.
So we're harnessed to these body bags and hauling them like sled dogs back to the outpost.
Were you able to like pull all of it? I mean,
no, I remember taking 2 body bags that we had to lighten the load of. Everybody was weak and not in peak physical condition, and so just the task seemed arduous. But we knew for the survival of our fellow soldier, we had to do it. And it was so amazing to watch these young guys just dig deeper than they ever had. Everybody acknowledged it was the hardest thing they'd ever done. But I remember that story like it was yesterday. What's crazy about that, coming out off that moment to where Fawn and I are today, is soon after that mission, we received mail from home, and Fawn had sent me a baking book called Tartine, written by a fella named Chad Robertson, which stands in a prominent position in the bakery today. But she sent me this book just as I had always been interested in baking, and sent it to me just as a kind of to fill some time.
What's Tartine mean? Do you know? Is it like his name or something?
I don't know what Tartine is. It's the name of his bakery's
chain. Think of tartan,
chain.
Like the Scottish, family tartan.
It's a great question. I should know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Being that this was such a pivotal book.
It was more what you got from the book than the name.
I didn't really linger over the name at the time.
Yeah. Not important.
But I remember so after consecutive missions and the daily grind, I'd come back and read this book. And it was this guy's story with recipes about how he came to make sourdough bread and make a living from it. And the connection to today is I was so inspired in that particular environment that I was in and conditions I was in, that he had made his passion his profession. And he had done so by just grinding through hard work, and doing what he loved, though, became how he supported his family. And he has since become a most famous baker and has started a whole chain of successful bakeries around the globe.
To get him on the podcast.
It would be amazing. Chad.
Shout out to Chad.
You've had a great impact. But he's inspired me and so many others. I mean, he's so prominent in the baking world. But that was the spark that got me excited, not necessarily about baking for a living, but what we thought we were going to do was farming for a living by, hey, finding something you're passionate about carries you through so much of the grind.
Yeah.
To provide for his family. So that was really inspirational, and it was just it came at such an interesting time on the heels of that extraordinary situation, and has great impact obviously on what we're doing to this day. But that story stands out among others just because of the difficulty, the leadership challenge of it, and how it has shaped pieces of my character that I think are important in running the business today.
Yeah. So you got obviously you got back with the supplies because you're here now. So and then you guys get helevaced. Is that the right term? Is that it? What's the word?
We retrograded. Would be the proper
You
term.
retrograded out of there.
I
You
think
got out of Dodge, and then that book's there as this juxtaposition to you get back and you start reading this book, and you keep having experiences like the one you shared, which thank you for sharing. That's such a crazy story. And they're both going kind of in parallel, right, is what I'm hearing you say.
I think the receipt of that book was a real catalyst for thinking differently about how we wanted to spend the rest of our life. And it was made more significant based on what Fawn and I endured in that 10-month deployment. We just realized the brevity of life and the significance of how you choose to spend the time on earth. And for us, that really manifested itself. And we want to do something together. We want to do something where we're pulling in the same direction day by day, and that there can't ever be enough time together. So let's do something together. And that for us at the time was farming. It has since become baking for a living, but we were able to do it together.
So I'm probably fast forwarding over some stuff, but you're in the Rangers. You went on to Ranger Regiment, which is the most elite level of Ranger, right? And then you leave, is it active duty, and you went into the Army Reserves, and that's around the time you and I met, when you were in the reserves, moved to Lexington.
Yes, I did. So I came back from that first deployment, and then had the desire to get out of the Army, and that several mentors had spoke to me about trying the Ranger Regiment. So it's 75th Ranger Regiment is a group of all Rangers, and it's a special operations arm of the Army.
Went to the
I went to the selection
top of that. Yeah.
Went to the selection for that, got selected, and then deployed again with the Rangers in a different environment, whole new set of challenges back to Afghanistan. And then it was after that second deployment that Fawn and I made the decision to get out of the Army. So he came off active duty, transitioned to the Virginia National Guard, where I served several more years. During that time, you and I met. So while I was part of the National Guard, had bought the farm, was a firefighter, and
that's right. You were a local firefighter too. That was like your business. Yeah, that was your day job,
right?
And then you would do the National Guard reserves trainings and stuff. We'd be gone for a month or a week or whatever.
Yeah, and the Guard served to. It really helped us bridge the gap between getting a federal paycheck and transitioning to doing something full-time on our own. But we got out of the active duty Army with the express purpose of starting our own business, because we thought in doing so we can achieve that vision that we had of working together, working as a family, and maximizing our time together.
So that's an interesting part of your story that I think anybody listening that's in the military might like to hear a little bit about, just your take on. So you transitioned from active to reserves. Like, what, for anybody that's thinking about doing that and maybe thinking about taking on something entrepreneurial as they leave military life and go to civilian life, do you have anything you'd say to that person, or even to yourself looking back?
it's so easy sitting on this side of things. But I think folks transitioning, I can only speak to the infantrymen, where I find it most easy to speak to those type of people that have a certain mentality and a certain way of doing life and looking at life, which contributes greatly to trying something out as an entrepreneur. But I would say and if I could talk to myself at that point of transition, would be, don't hesitate. I think that would be my encouragement to myself or to anybody else trying, is the passion that you have can cover so many of your other deficiencies. And if the passion's there, don't hesitate. So I think there even are several points in our story where I wish I would have just jumped in. And we really did. I think we could be even further along in our entrepreneurial journey if I hadn't have hesitated, if I hadn't have been as careful as I was. I think that I would have taken more risks. But yeah,
I think that's really powerful. Don't hesitate. I love that. I need to hear that. I think that makes me think of something that Jill and I do when we're talking about an entrepreneurial decision. Is we'll talk through what's the worst case scenario and lay out, obviously there's more than one, but we try to get to some of the worst case scenarios with an idea we might have. Well, if we do this, what's the worst could happen, right? And basically, as long as we go down that road and we're okay with the worst case scenario, then, which sometimes we are, sometimes we're not, right? Helps us gauge the risk.
Right. And I
then
think
hit the gas. Like with not hesitating, like what's the worst thing that could happen by building a bread oven in your backyard? Right. I remember when you did that.
There's like, very little downside.
You're out the materials, but you got an oven in the backyard and you can cook bread for your family. Didn't work as business, but I got this bread oven and I'm okay with that worst case scenario. I'm not gonna, whatever. You didn't have to mortgage everything in your life to build that first bread oven. And
I think some people that wouldn't make sense in their decision making. Like that seems a little too brash, but for us, that really did make sense because when we're talking things on a risk scale, the worst thing that could happen, we just walked through in the military with these deployments and literally life on the line of separation. We've literally just walked through the worst case. So there's not much that's going to happen that's going to top that or come close to it. So heck yeah, we're jumping in.
Yeah, you're a dangerous entrepreneur. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story. That is it's so great to know the backstory because I only got to know you at the tail end of that first chapter of your adult life. And it is so fascinating for me to see as your friend how that, you shared that great snapshot of what Ranger life was like being deployed, but how that time in life shapes the way you approach business now. Your ability to grind and to lead the way, lead your team. It really is. Oh man, that's such great context for me as your friend. And I've heard a lot of that story you shared before. But yeah, thank you for giving us that gift. And I think it'll be really fascinating to dive into, okay, you leave your active military, it's your dream come true deployments and in terms of military life, but then family, the desire for time with Fawn and your daughter and now all your children is there and ends up winning easily over the dedication to the military, which is so still I can tell, I know in you is still so deep, the respect you have for what you did and for anybody in the military. But yeah, that transition then into civilian life where you're full-time employed and you go from full-time employed to starting to dabble in starting your own business. I think that chapter is going to be really fun to explore together because I have a lot of, I know more of that part of the story, but I have a lot of questions. I think there's a lot of just sweet victories in there, unexpected challenges. I remember, oh man, in the beginning, you baking all night long. You would go to work all day and then come home and start baking at what, 9 o'clock at night or something. You'd put the kids down and then go out to your
9 to 9
homemade furnace, and or bread oven, I should say, and bake all night. And just what that chapter of life looked like for you. So awesome.
Can't wait.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into that in the future. Thank you for sharing that story. And yeah, that's a wrap.
See you next time.